first ever Fascia Guide live. Welcome, Per.
Thank you, Maxel.
I hope all the viewers and listeners are aware that this is like the first try, and we have done this in as a trial before, but never live. So it could be some technical issues, it could be some microphones, it could be things happening, but we will try to be as relaxed as possible, right? Because that's the purpose of this live show, is to have a little bit more relaxed conversation about fascia, and be, of course, be professional, be serious, be intense, but also be a little bit more exploring. Like we talked today about what this is supposed to be and what the format is, what the format can do for us, and this is a way to explore our way of thinking, our way of understanding the body, our way of basically transforming all this new research and new knowledge and everything that evokes into day-to-day life, understanding our lives and society and the world we're living in. Right. Or what is your ambitions with these calls, Per?
Well, I agree. I think a searching conversation where we, as you said, explore various possibilities of thought and practice related to fascia in a very wide sense. So nothing about ready answers, but just following a train of thought and see where it leads.
And the first episodes will be just you and me having a conversation about what we have been doing this year and what we're thinking of at the moment, like what topics we have in mind, basically. But we want this to be a forum where we can open up for bringing on guests, and we have our first guest on December the 4th. More about that later, and also to interact with the viewers. So if you have any ideas or topics or things you want to discuss, if you have comments, please just put them in YouTube and let us know. I will try to learn how to watch the chat while I'm doing this. And if you want to give us a super chat or a follow or subscribe to the channel, that would help us a lot. But just sit back and try to enjoy, if it's something enjoyable, basically. Per, we talked about topics, and let's go straight into it. The title of this episode is a conversation about fascia, which means it's a conversation about everything. And why? What do you think about when you hear that title? Or why is fascia a conversation about everything for you?
Basically, it's the reason I became interested in fascia in the first place, because I have no background whatsoever in any as a professionally speaking. I have no background in any medical or body work field and such like. My background is in if you're talking academically, is in the field called human ecology, which is a transdisciplinary subject which tries to understand artificial and natural ecology together with human beings involved always in some way. So for a very long time I've thought about how to both conceptualize and to imagine how you can understand and get a grip on wholenesses of various kinds, the body as a whole, society as a whole, an ecosystem as a whole, and how do they interrelate, and what is a whole. So when I got to know you people and learn more about fascia, and you basically said that fascia is the wholeness organ of the body, I got immediately very interested, because one of my interests is how to I think imagine is the right word, really. How to imagine a living human being, such as ourselves, within an actual context, whether it's a social context or a natural context, ecological context. That means you will have to view both ourselves and the contexts in which we find ourselves as certain kinds of wholenesses, which are nested within one another in one way or another. So in short, the fascia perspective on the living body is extremely not only relevant but enlightening to me from my more general starting point.
What I love is that it's so practical because
Yes, that too, certainly.
when we okay, so for those of you who don't know, fascia is the structure and flow between all cells in the body. So outside of every cell, there's a structure of fiber proteins, collagen fiber, elastin fibers, and they are put together in a kind of a spider's web. But it's not just around every cell on a cellular level. It's inside the cell, but it's also in all different sizes. So it's big fields of fascia, big lines of fascia around the body. It's also the network between every cell. So it's multidimensional. It's not just in one level, it's in all level. It's very fractal in that sense. But what we have focused a lot on since the fall of 2020 is the fluid part of the fascia, so the flow between all the cells. And basically, it's water, it's hyaluronic acids, it's different always a hard word to say. Uh, anyway, it's the fluid around all the body, which is actually where a lot of the communication takes place. So cell migration is here, the immune system is here, and a lot of communication between different cells goes from the fluid flow between all the cells. So this is fascia, the fascia structure. And what researchers have seen is that it's everywhere. For example, a professor in pathology called Neil Teese, he injected one part of the body with a fluid that was colored, and that colored fluid was suddenly all over the body. So it spread all over the body in seconds or in milliseconds. And that's something that's perplexing the researchers, is that they look at fascia in one place and they see that it's connected to another place and another place and another place. You can't really divide it into different compartments or different areas. It's global at the same time, all over the place. And what's interesting is that's one challenge for people who want to understand fascia, that it's everywhere all at once, and everything is connected, so there's no beginning and no end. But the other thing that's interesting is that it's affected by everything. So, for example, if you are stressed, your body tenses up, and you produce hormones that goes to different areas in the body. For example, you produce cortisol that goes to an area, and that actually breaks down fiber proteins, because you shouldn't feel pain in that area when you're in a situation where you're stressed and so on. So the stress has a physical effect on the body, but the stress could be a thought or a feeling or a worry about the world economy or the memory of you being bullied as a child. So it's because stress can be anything and that affects the body, the fascia is actually affected by basically everything. It's a big topic to grasp, like how everything can be fascia. But we've had talks about basically everything, right, Per?
Yeah, well, I think you could say that fascia as a kind of integrating and wholeness organ of the body is affected by virtually everything we find ourselves, all the situations we find ourselves in, whether it is something we experience only inside our minds, or whether it's something that touches us from the outside. It could be an emotional impact from the outside. It could also be a physical impact from the outside. And in one way or another, the fascia reacts immediately, and it affects the flow within the fascia, which, as you said, interconnects the whole body without any limits. And ideally there should be a free flow within the wholeness of the fascia at all times. But if it is affected by some kind of impact or pressure, whether internally or externally, whether emotionally or physically, it tends to, if that has a more serious effect or more long term effect, it affects the flow, and that's when it so to speak freezes up, and you can get painful in certain areas which do not seem to have anything to do sometimes with the cause of the pain and the freeze up as such. Although there must be some interaction and some cause, of course, but it's very difficult to understand, and that's why it's requires, and this is my main interest in this area, is that it requires a different kind of thinking. You have to somehow correlate your both knowledge and experience and imagination in order to get a sort of mental picture of what is going on. And but you, in contrast to me, then you Axel, and your co-workers have very rich experience in also practical experience here with treatment and how that works, and that's one source of knowledge, the effects of various kinds of fascia treatment on pain.
Yeah, so my background is actually I'm here because my father kind of lured me into this when I was 19. He wanted someone to learn the internet and how to build websites and do marketing and Facebook and things like that back then. This was 2010. But I got to write a lot of articles about how the body works because I was the only one who could write in the company at the time. And I also got to experience a lot of treatments. And it's interesting when you have developed a machine that he has does, and he's using that to help people increase posture and balance. And that was the only thing we did, like increase posture and balance, and took pictures before and after. But what struck us was that people came in with a problem, and then you worked with posture and balance, and then the problem disappeared. So it was not a treatment for example, back pain or whiplash, but the result was that was the effect of it. And I remember back then I was so naive. So I thought that if you have something that works, everyone would be like, "Oh, what a great discovery! Let's build on that. Let's do something about that." And the thing was that was not the case. That was not how everyone reacted. And I was a bit I was also 19, so then maybe you're more naive when you're 19. But I started talking to people around me. "Oh, you should go to a therapist and do treatment because that can really help you." "Can it help you?" "Yes, it helped this amount of people." And what we so when we started with this, we experienced that first of all we didn't know why it worked. We just knew that it worked, and we could also not provide a good enough explanation on that it worked to people. Like showing it works is not enough. You need to have some kind of explanation for why it works, and that got us interested in fascia. And I think back then the connection between understanding the body and working with the body, that you're actually not just reading about how things works, but actually explore how it works on a physical body, like in a practical sense. I think that connection came back then, because what we started to do was actually go through research and try to make that into practical applications. So we didn't have like in that industry, the manual treatment industry, there's a lot of people saying that we're using this method, and this method was developed by this person, and it was developed for 100 years ago, and it's really good. But we didn't have a method. We just had a machine and a way of thinking, and we gave it to different people with different methods, and they started bringing in their use of it. So someone was an acupuncturist and they used it in a sense, and someone was a chiropractor and they used it in that sense, and someone was a massage therapist and they used it like that. And then we could meet all together and share our different experiences, looking at, okay, what is the best practice over here? And I think that connection between the actual reality and the theories gets you a lot of, because if you take a thing like wholeness, like if you look at all things affecting the fascia, I'm gonna, this is the fun thing about being live. I'm actually gonna bring up a picture that we can use for this. If you just give me a second. Do, 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 do. See if I share my screen over here.
I think this is what you just said is interesting and important, because it really began this whole enterprise began at the empirical end, and only later on it became more and more closely tied to knowledge about fascia. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's so it's just, I'm just going to see if I can switch.
And I personally, I think that's a very good end to start at. Start with practice and then find, because that creates a kind of mutual interaction and understanding between practical work and theoretical
Yeah, it's also
knowledge.
to be open to other ways of looking at things. So this is a quote from a person we met at Fascia Research Congress back in 2015, and he said that the body is really complex, but the simplest way to understand it is that it loads and unloads pressure. Like everything is pressure, and that pressure is, the body takes in this pressure, it loads it, and it needs to unload it. And sometimes it can't unload it, and that's when things get stuck. But if you're healthy, then you're unloading it all the time. And we'll get back to what pressure is, but I think this is a good image to start with, because we had a lecture with this woman, a neurophysiologist from Germany, Heike Jäger, and she explained all of the different things affecting the fascia or affecting the tissue regeneration or the body's ability to heal itself. And if you look at this, is practically everything. Like age, it's genotype, it's diseases, medication, nutrition, social stress. It's all of these things affecting the fascia. But what's interesting from a wholeness point of view is that it's not research about how sleep, age, and medication affects fascia, or how a fascia with the correct nutrition affects sleep and age. And so the arrows are going from the outside in, not backwards or cross, or and this must be a problem in general, parallel, like how to understand wholeness, that you're looking at one thing at a time.
Yeah, indeed. What you have there is basically a list of rather abstractly conceived factors, which or occurrences which affect the fascia. But the fascia, of course, does not really, as such, distinguish between all these theoretically conceived, to our minds, distinct things. Well, you take pollution and genotype. When we think about pollution and genotype, respectively, we don't think, we think about them as diverse fields of study or different kinds of phenomena. But the fascia is such, which reacts to all these factors and many besides, which we probably don't even have names for. The fascia as such does not distinguish between them. So that's the problem in a nutshell. The problem of understanding fascia in a nutshell is because a person affected by, say, some sports activity, this might seem then quite straightforward. Well, I trained too much, or I sprained an ankle or something, or I fell, Uh, but when it comes to the fascia, it may be that the reaction on that seemingly simple physical impact, the fascia's reaction might also relate simultaneously to a former psychological stress, which makes it worse. So what happens here, I think, intellectually, is that our ordinary categorization of things and what can happen breaks down. So it makes it very clear that we have to find a different kind of thinking here in relation to what happens within the living body. And fascia is a kind of short, well, what is fascia here really? Of course, it's the tissue we call fascia, but it's also actually in life, it's the living response of the whole body to something. So well, I think most of those who listens to this conversation only can grasp quite easily why it's certainly not clear cut how to make sense of this. And that's also why I think the empirical part here, the treatment part, is so important, because gives us the data which will have to be taken into account when trying to understand it as well. So because the ordinary categorization when we try to understand our bodies, as I said, to my mind it breaks down and makes it necessary to construct new ways of thinking about what the heck is going on.
And it's actually even more tricky, because if you look at this image over here, you have age, for example, and then you have how age affects the tissue regeneration. But it's more complex when you look at this. Um,
Exactly.
This is images cut out from Gimbertau's video "Strolling Under the Skin," where he's filmed living tissue with endoscope. And search for "Strolling Under the Skin" and you can watch the whole video. It's really amazing. It's a really good presentation about what it means when the body is actually alive. And the thing is that this isn't necessarily a body that's in movement. This could be a still body. Like even in a body that's still, there's always movement. And these collagen fibers are they're dividing and they're merging, and they are smaller or bigger, and they are moving in that direction and then that direction. It's just like ever moving, and all these threads are as strong as steel. They've actually like cut out this from the body and placed a heavy weight on it and see how much weight it can hold, and it's extremely strong but very flexible. So this is what's going on at the same time. This is what's going on inside your body right now. This movement is always taking place. And we had a workshop this weekend where we tried to talk about basically two things, like what happens during a treatment, what happens inside the body, how does healing work, and what are the limitations to healing, like what is the body capable of healing. And to approach that in a different way, we started looking at three main concepts, or three main principles, or three main ideas. And one was that the body loads and unloads pressure. Like everything is pressure, and pressure is what's stuck in the body. So if and pressure could be a fall, pressure could be that you kicked kicked a rock or whatever. It can also be long-term bad posture. It could be from something you've eaten. It could be infection. Everything could be pressure, but it could also be thoughts, memories, feelings, ideas, habits, that you're worried. That can also be some kind of pressure. So pressure is everything affecting the body. That's principle number one. Principle number two is that the body is alive, and the more the more alive the body is, the more life, the better flow, and the better flow, the better healing. But then the third thing that we're also, everyone is unique. They say that we're as unique on the inside as we are on the outside. And if you take those three concepts and you go from this alive picture and then you go back to this picture, this is not a picture of living, moving, unique. This is a way to try to make to say something generally about how things work.
Yeah, and you can immediately see, after having seen these moving images, you can immediately see what's wrong with this image, as far as trying to understand what is going on. Because what you have here is abstract. Fascia in this image is really an abstract concept as well, and surrounding it you have other abstract concepts, and you have arrows pointing into the fascia, and this is a purely intellectual conceptualization. And if you in your way of thinking generally is stuck in this kind of thinking, categorical thinking, and arrows connecting concepts, you will never be able to in the combination of your thoughts and your imagination, you will never, they will simply put, they will be inadequate in relation to what is going on, because these concepts and these arrows and these boxes, they don't move. There's no sense of how they move one another or affect one another at all. And so much of how we think generally about things is based on these kinds of unmoving conceptualizations. So we are, this is a real challenge, a cultural challenge as much as a more specific medical challenge.
And that brings us in, I think, to the second part of the conversation for the first episode. And that's about principles. So we looked at, after we recorded about 100 episodes about fascia in Sweden, like 100-hour discussions, we looked at what have we learned so far. And one thing we realized is that there's a lot of emphasis on theoretical knowledge in our society, at least in the Western society. And maybe that's a disclaimer now. We are in Sweden. Maybe you can hear it on our voices, but we are in Sweden. We're based in Sweden. We've done most of our work in Swedish. And we are a rather extreme Western country, in a sense, Sweden. We'll get back to that in more episodes in the future. But what we have... So if you look at different types of knowledge, there is theoretical knowledge, what can be in a book or a study, or what you can learn from that kind of concepts, and you have experiential knowledge, which is basically something else. And I usually use an example of, if you take 3 people, one is a person who don't really know how to cook, and then you take an amateur chef, like someone who is on MasterChef or something like that, and then you take Jamie Oliver, and you put them all in the same room with the same equipment, the same type of food, we give them the same recipe, the same instruments, all the circumstances are completely the same, and you ask them to prepare that meal, you will get 3 very different meals. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something most people can agree upon. And one difference here is that there is a different experience between these 3 persons on how to prepare food in a good way. So that's one way to explain the difference between experiential knowledge. And my idea is that we don't really appreciate that type of knowledge in our society today.
Well, one reason for this is that it's very difficult in our terms to conceptualize experiential knowledge, what we have experienced and the knowledge we have gained by living. It's a different kind of knowledge, much more immediate, and we often call it subjective. and therefore of less value than so-called objective knowledge, which is oriented towards what we perceive as the outer world. And this is a deep philosophical difficulty, really, which is so ingrained in our Western society that we're hardly aware of it. And this is also another context in which fascia becomes very interesting, because fascia, as we have hinted at already, doesn't really care at all about what's inner and what's outer, what's objective, what's subjective. It's everything affects fascia anyway, and we can see fascia like in this. In the moving images earlier, we can in a way see an image of living tissue, of living fascia. We can also examine fascia in dead bodies, of course, and various preparations. But it's very easy to forget that our most immediate access to fascia is by just feeling our own bodies, becoming conscious, aware of what's going on within ourselves. And that last comment, I think, is extremely important, because if we can gain a more and more adequate understanding of fascia, also theoretically, and by means of various treatment experiences of treatment, whether as a patient or as the one who treats, because we can learn to become aware of our own bodies. Because we all know, if I do this to myself, I just put my fingers somewhere on my own body. I don't have to think. Now I am putting my finger on my forehead. My forehead, without knowing that it is my forehead, immediately feels a pressure from my fingers. So that kind of direct access to, and very much what I am feeling has to do directly with what we call fascia. So if we learn to think in this kind of double manner, we both think about what we are doing, and we experience what we are doing, and try to be aware of these two aspects at the same time. Eventually, I think we could become quite good at, what I was really going to say was that if the more theoretical and conceptualized knowledge about fascia, there's a way to test its adequacy, I think, because it will have to be quite easy to understand what we're talking about based on our experiences. And that's why this talk about pressure, I think, is very significant, because it has an objective side, but it also has a very clear subjective side, because we can feel physical pressure like this. We can feel very easily in all kinds of ways, and we do actually feel this every second of our lives in one way or another. But we also speak about pressure, internal pressure, like being stressed. The very word stress as a word for describing internal experiences has to do with pressure, of course. So I think fascia understanding demands that we find ways of thinking which makes it possible to have this kind of double-sided awareness. It's very difficult to have this simultaneously, but we can at least learn to switch between them and stop talking about subjective and objective as if they were two quite different things. They are not.
And I think here the trying to think of things in terms of principles or concepts or ways of more and more using your own intuition to get a grasp of what things could be about. For example, when we had this discussion this weekend, we talked about how do you understand the body as a whole. When someone comes in and they have a list of injuries they've been through, or medications, or they have this pain they're coming with, and they have this they're eating this supplements and this nutrition, and they sleep like this, and then you have their own history of exercises and movement and lifestyle, and you look at one person, how complex that person could be. But taking a step back, the question can be, how are you? Like it's a and if I ask how are you doing, that's a different, sincerely, it's a different way than looking at, okay, let's look at nutrition right now. Like we're usually so, you should dig into the specialized knowledge instead of looking at, or the details instead of looking at, how is this person doing. And one experiment we did, um, in a way, summarizing how you can use intuition differently but also use this knowledge differently, is the realization that thoughts and feelings, your actual consciousness, you are taking place in your body. Like your body is not an object. You are, the body is the place where you exist. Like this is not a matter of the thoughts and feelings are here somewhere. They're actually inside of me. And if you look at the fluid flow or the water in the body as, basically, I think we have an idea that consciousness is centralized. Either it's outside of the body or it's centralized to the brain.
Mm.
But anyone who's ever played the piano or the drums or done something with their hands, they know that there is intelligence inside their hands. And everyone who's ever done something that they didn't think about, they know there's a memory in movement. There's an intelligence in movements. There's a reaction to, you can react to things without thinking of it. There's a different intelligence in different parts of the body.
That is literally what experiential knowledge is. Experiential knowledge is not something you think about. I know that I can ride a bicycle. That's not an intellectual thought in me. My body knows it. I just have to get on the bicycle and I know how to do it.
And you
So,
don't have to relearn it. Like
yeah,
it's,
and I don't have to speak about it either.
and it's scary sometimes, but because I drive to work every day, and sometimes it's scary that I, I sit in the car, and then suddenly I'm home, and I have not really um, been aware of me driving. And one time I was feeling like that, and then I realized that even though I'm not aware of me driving, I'm a very safe driver. Like I'm so aware of everything taking place inside a car, but I'm not there mentally. I'm somewhere else, but I'm still there. So it's interesting in that sense. But if you take this concept of decentralizing the mind in a different sense, and if thoughts and feelings and intelligence is everywhere inside the body, that tells us something else about the body. And because we talked a lot to Jared Pollack, who is a world-renowned researcher on water, and he has proved that water can store memory, and in such a way that Microsoft actually granted him funds for developing a hard drive. So if you can develop a hard drive of water, that would be so much smaller than the current hard drives. And if you know anything about the storage of iPhone photos today, we have too much data, so we need smaller server halls, because the server halls are just expanding. So that innovation could be really interesting. But he has shown that you can store water in memory, and if you have water all over the body, and water can store memory, maybe your thoughts and feelings are all over your body in a sense. So with this concept in mind, we tried something, and that was, and this is something you can do now. Like if you close your eyes and you think of a place where you're calm, like a forest or a field or a lake or inside wherever you are when you're relaxed. What happens to your body when you do that? But what happens to your body, Per, when you think about a place where you're calm?
Well, it rather immediately affects my breathing, and as you said, there's a tendency to be more relaxed rather quickly. Probably it depends. This is an experiential thing too, because I think it depends on whether you have practiced. It's a kind of meditation, really. There are many kinds of meditation, but this is one kind. And if you have practiced some kind of concentration in this sense, in any way, whatever, I think you can use this extremely simple method very effectively and relax in a rather short time. If you haven't done this and consciously and sort of try to learn how to do this, it might be more difficult and take longer time, I think.
But it's interesting how instant it is. Like I tried it myself, and I just felt how my shoulders went back and my chest was
Yeah.
different, and
This
so
this particular exercise you mentioned now, it really depends very much on your strength imagination. If you
yeah, of
can
course.
imagine, if you can imagine yourself actually being in this place where you feel relaxed and calm, the effects can be very rapid.
But on the opposite, if you imagine yourselves being in a very stressful environment, like being in a
yeah, you have
place of
the opposite
threats,
reaction, of
or
course.
being in a big city, or being in traffic, or being, and if you do that, it shifts on the other hand. So depending on, of course, your experience with this, but so it's interesting how quickly you can go from one
But
physical
this is
state to the
this is
other.
what happens all the time, where because we have this thought chatter going on, most of us, most of the time, and every thought, every fleeting thought affects us in this way, and some thoughts are recurring and not very fleeting, like worry about something, or it could be we are happy about something, and whatever it is, it has an immediate effect on our internal state. And saying that it has an immediate effect on our internal state is the same as saying it has an effect on the fascia.
And that's what I mean. It's the same thing if you smell something that can take you to a different place, or you can actually imagine a taste, or you can hear a song and that transforms you to another place. So it's I don't think we stop and think about how powerful our own imagination is and the physical consequences of it, like what actually happens in our body when we experience these things. Even and we talked another some years ago. We talked about dreaming, and it's the same thing. So you can wake up at night being terrified, and you're sweating, and your body has the same physical reaction as if you were in that physical state, but you were only dreaming it. So the
Yeah, which means that the body doesn't care at all and make no doesn't distinguish between what is dream and what is a dream and what is so-called reality. The body doesn't make this distinction. It's even that is actually a concept in a certain sense. There's a difference in brain activity between dreaming and being fully awake in the so-called real world, of course. But experientially, there's really no difference, and in a certain sense, it's more of a conceptual difference than a real difference.
So on this topic, at least, why I wanted to have this introduction and talk about this subject is we explored that your way of thinking about things actually affects what you're able to think about or what you're able to grasp. So by using, and I'm going to bring it up again just because it's so beautiful, by using this backdrop when we were doing treatments, um, when we had our workshop, by having this in the background, everyone thought differently about how they should approach the treatment, and they discovered new things that they were feeling because they had the idea that the body is alive inside their minds when they were doing it. So it's a way, and we'll probably dig deeper into this on other occasions, but I'm always so it always strikes me how affected we are of our own ideas when we are to go into any given moment, basically.
Yeah, that's the way it is, folks.
Yeah, because I was thinking about a comment from. I'm gonna bring this on this screen instead. I'm learning how to deal with multiple screens at the same time. But Rose Quartz, she wrote a comment that we need a change in healthcare. We can't depend on chemistry and surgery anymore. And C. Auerbach, she said that the live stream is a really good way to promote the change of view in the human organism. And I think that that's kind of what we want to do here, like open up a new way of thinking or a different way to approach things to see if we can find different answers to things. Because I think, Perry, what you said in a conversation we had on a podcast, I don't know if it was in English or Swedish because we've done so many things throughout the years, but you said um, we have to think differently. So then we just, can't we just think differently? But it's not that easy. It's not, you can't just think differently if you have thought in a way your whole life, or few people can. It's a practice to start to think in a different way.
But yeah. Well, this is something we will have to return to. But basically, you can by yourself teach yourself in whatever way you find works to think differently. Although it's very difficult to do even for and by yourself. It's virtually impossible sometimes to make other people think differently. And one reason for the latter is that we are surrounded by already finished thoughts in the form of intellectual traditions, in the form of buildings, how they are organized, in the form of how various kinds of work are organized, and decision structures and hierarchies of all kinds. And these are all really kinds of thinking, although they exist physically and objectively as well. So for example, the modern medical establishment is based on certain ways of thinking and certain ways of treatment. And this isn't just a matter of thinking. It is very much a matter of thinking, but it isn't just thinking in the ordinary sense, because all these thoughts are literally, materially manifested in various institutions and departments and specialties and so on and so forth. So that's perhaps the main reason, and also economical structures. That's the reason it doesn't really help to just change how you think. You will have to organize and things differently, and do things differently, and build things differently in order to really change thinking.
And it's not about saying that one way is the correct one way and the one way is
No,
the
no.
wrong way. It's about changing. It's about being flexible in your way of thinking. It's about being able to have, and what's good with this is that we have everyone has this capacity, or have had this capacity, because the people who are best at this are children, and they can imagine, like a child can imagine anything. Like the floor can be lava, or they could be a princess, or it could be like my daughter right now has she's 3 years old. She's built a hospital under the furniture in the hallway, where the dog usually lies. So that's now a hospital for her 3 dolls, and she really believes it is. So it's amazing what imagination we have, what capacity we have for imagination. But then I think we probably need to be a little less serious.
Yes. I think we will have to return to the matter of perspectives, because that's really what we're talking about here. And I also think we will have to, in order to understand the kinds of things we've touched upon this last hour or so, we will have to abandon the idea that there is such a thing as an universal truth about anything,
Mm.
because everything depends on perspective. And if you think in terms of perspectives and you learn to shift perspective depending on context, then you can realize that what is true in one context cannot be, what was perhaps more adequately, what is useful in one context isn't useful in another context. So we have this very philosophical, theoretical view of what truth is and should be, and should be. We should be able, if we know the truth about something, it should be useful in any context, whatever, and doesn't if we just know it. But I don't think anything is like that. So that's one way of thinking. I think we will have to abandon and become more, as you said, flexible. But flexibility relates then to perspectives, experiences, and contexts.
Mm. I think why I love this, like these conversations and this topic, and um, basically why I decided to dedicate my life to this actually, because in the beginning I was here to help my father build something up, and to use my talents or whatever to help him build his dream. But it was after my first visit to a fascia research congress that in back 2015 that I realized that this is what I want to do. So since the spring of 2016, and that's actually, what is it, like 8 years now, 9 years? It's such a long time. Um, and why? Like why are we here? I think what I like with fascia is that the more I learn about it, the more I talk about it, the more I try to understand it, and the more I try to help other people understand it, the less the more I realize that I don't know anything at all. Like it's
That's always a good
I
start.
don't understand anything, and then I think I think I understand something, and then I'm like, okay, now we got it, and then something happens, and then it's like, well, yeah, we need to, okay, and it's very humbling. And as soon as I realize that I know something, I try to explain it to other people, and they don't understand, and then I'm like, okay, I'm doing something wrong here. I should. So there's always so many levels with this, and it's very humbling. And the other thing is that the more I learn about fascia, the more aware I become. Aware of my own strengths, my own shortcomings, but also of my own movements, of how things feel. And not only like how a movement feels, but also like how food feels, or how drink feels, or how when I eat this, how does my body react to that? Or when I drink that, what happens then? Or when I'm in this environment or with this person, how am I reacting? So I was at this meeting with the two people, and I felt so tired afterwards. And I'm like, why am I tired? That's probably because of the dynamic in that. So it's it gets me. My physical reaction gets me thinking about life or what I'm doing, and also what
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
do to cope with this. And that's very empowering, that I can behave in a certain way, I can eat certain things, I can realize some things, and that changes my whole view. Like what I told you about the other day, I realized that in order to do all the things I want to do and spend so much time without getting too tired or too stressed out, or all things happening at once, and being able to manage that, uh, the the core principle behind how I look at what I do has to be that I'm full of excitement. And if I'm excited and I feel a lust to do things, then it's not work, it's play. So transforming work into play makes it more exciting, which gives me more energy. So the same task can be energetic and the same task can be tiring depending on my perspective and view on it. And that's also interesting when you study fascia, that you have to, or you start, not have to, you start to feel, experience, and resonate and become conscious about things you're doing.
Yeah, what's fascinating is that everything that you just said somehow relates in one way or another to how fascia works and what fascia does. So that's what's great about focus, or let's say grounding these kinds of thoughts in fascia in relation to fascia, is that you remain grounded in what it's all about, namely your own experience in your own body, but it doesn't stay there. It can expand to the most philosophical topics, if you like, but these philosophical topics then become less in one sense, and I think that's a very good thing, less philosophical and more a matter of how we experience things, and how what's the point of this or that, and such questions.
Yeah.
So the fascia is kind of a trick. To my mind, it's basing various kinds of discussions and reflections and on fascia, and why way or another is kind of trick, a kind of mental trick to stay on topic and not fly out into some abstract space and never find your way back again.
Yeah. So this was the first episode of the Fascia Guide Live. We don't really know where this will. We don't really know what we have started with this. Like this is an experiment. We think it's going to be a fun experiment, but it is a format we've never tried before. We've never been live like this, or we have been on stage, but not like this. And the idea is to bring on some guests. The idea is to interact more with the listeners. So if you have any topic you want us to bring up or talk about, send an email to live@fasciaguide.com with your suggestions, and we will. And you can also comment in while we have the live feed, and you can send us messages. But we could talk about everything, though we have planned for some more fundamental episodes in the beginning, just to talk about these things, like pressure, for example. Or I think next time perhaps we'll talk about the principal understanding and dig a little deeper into that, and fascia in the living body. But or something else, we'll see. But this is the concept, and if you like it, please share it with your friends. Give us a like and a subscribe. Follow the Fascia Guide, and we'll talk to you next week. Do you have any final words, Per?
Not really at the moment. No.
Has
See
it
you
been
next
fun?
time.
Did you enjoy it? Was it fun?
Yeah, I thought it was a good conversation. Let's continue in this vein.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Yep. See you.
Nu är vi inte live längre.
Nej.
Det var lite trevande i början, men sen tycker jag det är ganska bra.
Ja, men jag tyckte det flöt på rätt bra. Förvånansvärt bra ändå.
Det var skönt, tycker jag, att kunna ta in skärmen. Det tycker jag var bra.
Ja, det får du gärna förbereda. Och jag kanske kommer på något också, men det är du som står för kontrollerna. Så det är nog väldigt bra om vi kan ha lite förberedda bilder. Faktiskt. Det är det. Det var mycket bra. Men det var fint att du kunde improvisera det nu på studs. För det måste man utnyttja när man är live visuellt.